welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jeff Richardson, Director of Product Marketing here at Kochava, and we are going to be talking about SKAdNetwork today, SKAN. And I'm really excited that we have our partners with us on from Dataseat as well as Wavemaker. Before we jump into speaker introductions, I do want to go ahead and go over some quick announcements. So number one, we love to connect with you and engage with you during the event. So be sure to visit the chat over in the sidebar. And then if you have questions, we have a lot that came in through registration, but we'd like to have your questions during the event as well. You can submit those through the Q&A tab in that sidebar window. Additionally, we usually always get a question about, hey, is the webinar going to be available afterwards? Will it be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded and it will be available for on-demand access after the event. Within about 24 hours from today, you'll receive an email with a link to access that so you can watch it later, share it with other people within your org, your team, your network. Additionally, in the Docs tab in the sidebar, we have some helpful resources, not only from Kochava, but also from some of our partners. So be sure to explore those. Feel free to open those in another tab, and you can take a look at those and browse those after the event. And last but not least, do connect with us online. Follow us across Facebook, X/Twitter, LinkedIn. We'd love to keep the discussion going. So with that, let's go ahead and let's bring on all of our speakers. And I'm really excited to have them introduce themselves. So I'm going to move them all up here to the stage with us so we can dive into this discussion here. So welcome, Zach, Mark, Brooke, I think is coming up here as well. Awesome, welcome. Let's go ahead and just dive right into introductions, and maybe we can go as we see you in the slide on the screen. Start with Brooke, then go to Mark and Zach. Tell us a bit about yourself, and I will be quiet for a moment while you do that.
Sounds great. Hi, everybody. My name is Brooke Wilson. I'm a manager of client success for the US here at Kochava. And I've been with the company for just over 2 years, working in the client success department organization. It's been amazing. So that means I'm typically helping clients as they use our product, our measurement product. Kochava is a mobile measurement platform. We've been in the space since 2011. Started off mostly mobile focused, but over the years, it's definitely expanded. We're more of an omnichannel measurement solution at this point and constantly innovating, constantly moving forward. Very excited about SKAN. It's one of my favorite topics. It's one that I get a lot of questions on and my team gets a lot of questions on. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Brooke. Mark.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. My name is Mark Menery. I'm Vice President and Global Head of Sales for Dataseat. Anyone who's not familiar with Dataseat, we are a privacy-first mobile DSP. Essentially, we were founded on the premise that IDFA, Google Advertiser ID, would eventually go away. So we built a 100% contextual platform for advertisers. Quick high-level background on me. I've been in the space for about 14 years now. Started off at a company called JumpTap back in 2010. So I remember Kochava being founded in 2011, and I've worked with many folks at Kochava pretty much my entire career. So great to be here, and thank you to you guys for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I'm Zach Griffin. I'm our mobile practice lead at Wavemaker. And for anybody who doesn't know, Wavemaker is a global media agency within the Group M family, working with a lot of large advertisers across a number of different verticals, from healthcare to technology and more. So my role as mobile practice lead is to basically understand all of the nuances that we all know are inherent to the mobile ecosystem, which is basically what we're here to talk about today, and consult with our clients and our client teams on how to design media strategies that account for those nuances and really help our clients build a competitive advantage when putting media into market by understanding what's going on in the mobile space, what's happening in the mobile space on topics exactly like this one. So really appreciate being here and excited to get into it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you all three for joining. And I just have to, as a fun sidebar, when you talk about SKAN, how do you typically refer to it? Because I know some folks are always calling it by the full name, StoreKit Ad Network or SKAdNetwork. Some I hear call it SKAD, some say SKAN. Just across the three of you, what's the typical verbiage that you use when you speak to the SKAdNetwork?
I'm a SKAN guy. SKAdNetwork but
Yeah.
I don't think there's any wrong answers there.
Yeah, anytime I can abbreviate, I typically do. So I'll go with SKAN myself.
SKAN.
I think I'm the odd one out. I say SKAD or SKAdNetwork, but SKAN makes perfect sense. And I think it's one that as a team we're moving towards.
Yeah, for real. Awesome. Thanks for indulging my little sidebar there. Well, yeah, so we have a lot to get through. I wanted to just touch base on our agenda for the day. So first, there may be some of you that are on that are new to SKAN, even though it's been out for almost, I think, about 6 years here at this point, coming close to that here soon. It is still new to a lot of folks. So we have some guides on SKAN, some blogs about SKAN, and on a regular basis, I think it's a topic that's new for somebody that's maybe first entering into iOS marketing. So we are going to do a TLDR on SKAN. Then we're going to talk about the current state of SKAN, look at some of the trends, if you will, some insights and data. And then we're going to work through some best practices because we have, the agency side, the DSP kind of media partner side, as well as a measurement side. We've got a perfect trifecta of perspectives here. So really excited to unpack those different POVs across these items. And then we will have Q&A, dedicated time at the end. But if you have questions, please submit them throughout. A lot of the questions that came in through registration, we are actually going to tackle those within the main agenda that we have before us. So to kick off, I'm going to hand off to you, Mark. I'd love you to give a 30,000 foot kind of perspective on what is SKAN, SKAdNetwork, StoreKit-AdNetwork. At the same time, I'm also going to launch a poll for the audience because we kind of want to see where you're at with SKAN these days. So Mark, take us away. I'll go to this next slide and I'm going to launch this poll here for the audience.
Yeah, great. So SKAN, or SKAdNetwork as it was originally referred to and then shortened to SKAN after, is basically Apple's privacy preserving ad attribution. It was released in 2018, but it really didn't, pick up much steam until ATT was released in April of 2021, which of course began the deprecation of IDFA. I think of SKAN in its simplest form. Essentially, it's Apple's framework that they created to ensure that you can no longer tie any ad attribution, or ad campaign information to an individual user. So conversion information, click impression, whatever that might be, they wanted to stop that being tied back to an individual user. So that's SKAN in a nutshell.
That's great. It's a helpful overview. And Brooke, I know we put this is kind of the TLDR bullet list, if you will, on just some key fact points about SKAN. Do you want to quickly kind of walk us through some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what I'd say is that it's a topic that on the measurement side, we have a lot of clients who come and ask us about it because it's new and it's different, and the data is aggregate and anonymized. So just a few key points here. It's anonymous attribution, but it is deterministic. It's handled on device by Apple. So it's a deterministic attribution all the way. But the data is a bit weird when you compare it to what you might be used to on the Android side, or if you're prompting for ATT in your MMP platform measurement. It's aggregated. There are certain windows that you can set, and then it's very install focused. So it's focused on attributing either a install or re-download. We are looking forward with SKAN 5. We're looking forward to learning more about how Apple will be handling re-engagement, which will be exciting for the event side of things. But there are a series of timers that delay the data. When you receive the data, it's going to be anonymized, so you can't tie it back to a specific user. And what I would say there is that you're likely using a conversion model of some kind. If you're a Kochava customer on the measurement side, we have pre-built models that you can use that help you get those post-install event signal, because the SKAN itself is very install focused, at least at this point. Yeah.
No, that's great. There's and if you're curious to dive much deeper into not only the backdrop of SKAN, beyond just the TLDR, the technical ins and outs of how it works, in the Docs tab, there is a link to our Ultimate Marketer's Guide to SKAN. Definitely check that out. It's worth a read if you want to deep dive on the topic and become, if you will, an expert within your org on it. So at this point, let's talk about the current state of SKAN. This is where we're going to talk about where do things sit today from what Kochava sees as a measurement partner, Mark as well, what Dataseat sees. As we jump into this, I do want to quickly show the results of our poll. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my presentation here for a moment so I can bring the poll results up onto the screen. So this is where we sit right now with the audience. So we have one vote for not using SKAN at all. And then we've got a mix here across those that are looking at SKAN, but it's not their primary measurement tool for all things iOS. And looks, hey, we've got more engagement coming in now that we have this up on screen. And then SKAN is my source of truth on iOS, one vote. I think in future, I think we'll see that change as re-engagement comes on board, as SKAN 4 adoption, which we'll look at here in a moment in terms of where that sits, increases. And then looks like almost an even tie between looking at it occasionally and looking at SKAN to make optimization decisions. So thank you for participating in that. And looks like the not using SKAN at all has gone up to 20%. So I will keep that poll open. I'm going to take it off screen, but continue to participate in that. If you haven't voted yet, we'd love to get the entire audience to respond on that so we can see the full 100% of where everyone sits. So let me jump back to our slide deck here because we have some really interesting data insights to unpack. Let me get that back up on screen here and we'll jump through some of these charts here. And let me know if you can see my screen. I can, yep, there we go, perfect. So I'm going to do a couple of quick intros on these, and then Brooke, Zach, Mark, feel free to chime in on this as well. This chart right here is actually looking at basically the sources of iOS attribution for installs across 2020 to 2023, all the way into October. So what you're seeing here, right, is this, self-attributing networks is one source. Apple search ads is up here at the top. We have the SKAdNetwork in the purple, and then there's probabilistic attribution and IDFA attribution. So you notice here, right, in April of 2021 is when the ATT framework became enforced with iOS 14.5 right here. And you can see that's when the SKAN purple starts to carve out its wake. And you can see that other things like probabilistic IDFA start to go down. Now, one reason probabilistic still has this portion here, all of that is on the back of owned media. So within owned media, right, your own websites and your own apps, same for IDFA attribution, there's still measurement and tracking you can do because it's within your own first-party universe of either your app properties under your Apple account or between your own website and your own app. So if you were driving users from your own website to your app, that'd be considered first-party data. It's not tracking between third-party sites from another company. So that's why you see that probabilistic here. Are there any other comments that you have, Brooke, Zach, Mark, on just the trends that you're seeing here in terms of SKAN slowly kind of carving out more and more of the space? Anything you want to share insights-wise from what you're seeing?
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me looking at this chart is if we look at September of 2022 onward, the trend pretty much stays the same. We've been locked in this pattern for the last year and a half of hybrid measurement. So I'll talk a little bit about why I think that is and where we're going, but it feels like we're at a point right now where advertisers have said, I understand how to measure my media on iOS. I've settled on a methodology, and I haven't really had much of a reason to change that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that just hasn't been fully enforced yet. We believe that's coming, but Zach, I definitely agree with you. I think from our angle, we're starting to see the increase, which is really good, and I'll talk to that in a few minutes. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's something that hasn't been completely enforced yet. Although with WWDC in 2023 and some of the announcements there, we feel it's coming, right? Which is good.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is another chart that's even more interesting. This is actually the distribution of SKAN traffic. So SKAN transactions, and from 0 to the full 100%, and the percentage makeup across different self-attributing network partners, which are some of those major super publishers that we're all familiar with, and then some DSPs and other kind of ad network players, if you will. And I guess the takeaway from this slide is the majority of the scan volume that we're seeing is really split amongst not necessarily a handful, a bit more than a handful, but a small collection of supporting media partners. So there are far more media partners that support SKAN in terms of they are SKAN enabled. They're registered as an ad network with Apple for SKAN. They have SKAN enabled inventory. I know you're going to talk more about that, Mark. But I think diversity and seeing this field become more diversified and spread out, where we have more players with more of a footprint, is going to benefit the market and give advertisers more options. So anything any of you want to chime in on this chart?
I would just say I definitely agree. And I think that at least from where I stand, I see more and more advertisers pushing their networks to integrate with SKAD and become SKAD certified or SKAN certified. I need to adjust that as we work through this. But yeah, I do think especially, and it comes down to, in my experience, whether the app is prompting for ATT or not, how important SKAN is to that advertiser.
Yeah. Agreed. Let me jump in. The one other slide that's quite telling here is this is similar, right? 0 to 100% at the top. And this is basically the distribution of all of the SKAN traffic that Kochava observes by the version of SKAN that traffic is for. And so we're going all the way back here to March of 21 and then all the way up through to January of 24. So just this month that we're in right now. And you can see, right, their SKAN versions are up at the top. 1 is white, 2 green, 3 blue, and 4 is SKAN 4, which is the pink. But we are starting to see an uptick on SKAN 4 adoption in the new year here for sure. But for a long time, SKAN 3 was and is still dominant. So any thoughts, I guess, from the group here on why the SKAN 4 adoption, given that it was announced at WWDC of 22, I believe, and then support and traffic kind of came online, if you will, late 22, why we're kind of where we're at with SKAN 4 adoption at the moment and just starting to see it take off.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that's driving this trend right now is the large publishers, specifically Google and Meta, rolling out features for SKAN 4. So it's starting to feel more tangible to advertisers, the benefits that we've been talking about for the last year and a half that we knew have been coming with SKAN 4, but haven't quite felt real to advertisers. So we've seen publishers making those changes, advertisers getting on board with updating their SDKs, seeing the value of SKAN 4. At Wavemaker, we still do a lot of education with our clients as to what are the benefits of SKAN 4. We need to make a business case to our dev team in order to update the SDK. But I think we're starting to see that inflection point.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. And I think the other thing too is that when you look at the different versions of SKAN, so SKAN 2, 2.2, 3.0, 4.0, SKAN 3 was really the first version that was fit for purpose, right? So I think that when advertisers got on to SKAN 3, part of it was, well, this might be good enough for now, right? And I don't know if all of them necessarily realize is that, SKAN 4 has all of these great benefits, right? But if it's not being fully enforced just yet, why bother updating to SKAN 4.0? But I agree, Zach. I think it's kind of this chicken and the egg thing, right? Like who's going to go first? The advertisers, the publishers, both. And I think that's the reason why we've seen such, steady SKAN 3 adoption and not a huge jump in SKAN 4. But I'll talk just in a minute on the publisher side and some of the data that we're seeing.
Yeah. And Brooke, what are you seeing from, some of the advertisers that you work with that have already become SKAN 4 enabled or are waiting for maybe the key media partners to again, make that leap first?
Yeah, totally. I think I'm very much in alignment with Zach and Mark on this one, but advertisers are kind of on board with SKAN 3. SKAN 3 finally makes sense. We're starting to wrap our heads around how to read the reports, how to use the data for optimization and all of that. And so then, SKAN 4 has some, it's quite different. It's going to take some adjustments. The conversion model that the advertisers use needs to be adjusted. The way that they read the data back will be slightly different. There are multiple postbacks, depending on where the audience is at with understanding the differences that came out with SKAN 4. the big picture is it's significantly different. So I think that that will come more and more. We've been having conversations for, I guess, over a year now with our main advertisers about SKAN4. They're very interested in it, but it does require lift, both on the advertiser side in terms of updating the SDK, if they're using the Kochava SDK or another MMP, and updating their conversion model. But then also, are the networks that the advertisers are spending with certified for SKAN4, and are they running on SKAN4, and is the inventory there? And I think that industry-wide, as we can see in this chart, it's starting to take off. We're heading in that direction, but there's been sort of does the advertiser go first or the network go first, to Mark's point? And I think that a lot of advertisers are waiting to make that business case once they can say all of our major partners are there, they're ready, and now we're going to catch up.
Yeah.
I completely agree with Brooke there, and that's what we've been hearing from advertisers as well. And I think there's some good old-fashioned inertia going on that we don't want to break something. We don't know exactly how to look at the numbers. We're trying to wrap our heads around it right now. So I think that we are at that inflection point, but adoption isn't going to be a straight line up. It'll continue to trickle in over time.
Yeah, and I agree. It's effort, right? Like anything else. I mean, you're configuring new conversion events. You're sorting those into coarse grain. There's the source identifiers. So I know we'll go over all that, but it's kind of like a why. And there's major benefits to being on SKAN4, and I know we're going to go through those. But I don't know if they're all realized, but certainly from an optimization perspective and what we see, SKAN4 is light years beyond SKAN3.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about jumping into some slides from Dataseat, Mark.
Why wait for SKAN ready, right?
Yeah. Can you unpack these for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is bid requests that we're seeing on a daily basis, roughly 50 billion or so, give or take. And I think that the major purpose of this slide, and we can move on in just a second, is that, we're SKAN ready. So 94% of the traffic that we see on a daily basis is SKAN ready, which is great. You can jump to the next slide though, Jeff. Yeah. So just to explain the slide before I go into it too much, the x-axis here is time. It's a calendar year 2023. We are a London-based company, so the months are in the middle, just so no one's confused. And then the y-axis here is percentage of traffic that Dataseat is seeing, right? And as you can see, the first half of the year was SKAN3 dominated, right? So when you look at when SKAN4 was released, which is October of 2022, the question is why, right? Like, we didn't see much of an increase on the publisher side that we're bidding on until almost halfway through the year, right? It was SKAN3 dominated. And again, what I typically say is, I think the reason for that is SKAN3 was the first version that was truly fit for purpose, right? However, entering into summer months of 2023, you get to about halfway through the year, it's like, all right, we see this giant jump in SKAN4 traffic. Well, why is that? We have WWDC in June, right? Apple announces privacy manifests, SKAN5, all of these changes, and the potential of this being enforced in the spring of 2024. So it's coming sooner than you think. So I think that's part of the reason why we saw this great jump in the inventory that we're bidding on. So if you move to the end of the year of 2023, roughly 51% of the traffic that we're bidding on is SKAN4 enabled, SKAN4 ready, and the remaining 44 or so percent, making up that 94%, is SKAN3. Just to note, if an advertiser comes to us and says we only want SKAN3, or we only want SKAN4, or we want both, we can certainly adhere to that, and we have plenty of volume to go around. So this to me is a good indicator as to where things are going, and I think when SKAN5 is officially released, we'll see a jump that happens actually a lot quicker.
Yeah, and Mark, are you? I know it's varied across the footprint of integration partners that we have, but are you set up at Dataseat to optimize not only on that first postback? Obviously, there was only one postback until SKAN4, and suddenly we had postbacks 2 and 3. So now there's 3 total, but there's a bit of a longer time window. Are you at Dataseat able to optimize on all 3 of those, or where does that sit today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the good thing with SKAN is we're all held to the same limitations, right? The privacy thresholds, the postbacks, tiers of crowd anonymity, the source identifiers, all those different things. So yes, we're optimizing to everything that everyone has in front of them, which is good news. Now, Dataseat's narrative and our foundation, our background is we're 100% contextual. This is what we were built from, or we were built from the ground up as a contextual DSP, privacy first. So we've been ready for SKAN since the beginning, which is great. yeah, certainly to those multiple postbacks and other pieces of the campaign, we're 100% ready. And most of our clients are, on SKAN or moving towards SKAN 4, if not already on it.
Yeah. And Mark, or Zach, from a Wavemaker perspective, what have you seen with SKAN 4 thus far in current state?
Yeah, so you can see I have the same chart that you shared a few slides back, because while that chart is looking at the macro perspective, we're really seeing a similar trend at the individual advertiser level, which, as I mentioned, is this hybrid approach. Advertisers have kind of settled into how they want to measure their media on iOS. We even saw that in the poll results, that very few advertisers right now are looking at SKAN as their single source of truth, and maybe using SKAN for some networks, but not others, maybe blending SKAN with other data within individual networks. But I do think that with SKAN 4.0 becoming more tangible, becoming more real, the changes that we're seeing right now, or that were released by Apple at WWDC, really do represent the most significant change to SKAN since its initial release. So I think a lot of the gaps will start to close. Advertisers will continue to get more on board with it. And that's what we've been encouraging the advertisers that we work with within Wavemaker to do.
Yeah. I know we mentioned, some of the benefits of SKAN 4 comparative to SKAN 3. Maybe I can invite any of you to voice over. This is just kind of the key 4 pillars, as I call it, and no pun intended with SKAN 4 and the 4 pillars, but of what changed with SKAN 4. So would one of you like to voice over these 4 items for us?
Yeah, I can do it. Sure. So there were a few, and not in any particular order, but there were a few changes that we got with SKAN 4. I like to think that SKAN 4 gave us the ability to do better optimization, better LTV tracking, even the ability to optimize across more inventory. So a couple changes is we were introduced to the coarse grain conversion event in SKAN 4. That's bucketing those fine grain conversion events into coarse grains of low, medium, and high. I know we'll go through that in more detail. Other is campaign IDs turned into source identifiers. I'll talk more about that later. But essentially, we were given more values to optimize off of, which is great. We're also given 2 additional postbacks. So in previous versions of SKAN, we were only given 1 postback. Now we have up to 3, which is great. And we can also now do web to app attribution. It is Safari only, but beggars can't be choosers. We're happy with that. So those were, I think, highlights, or at least the major high-level changes of SKAN 4. And anyone else, feel free to jump in if I'm missing something.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the web to app is an important one because prior to SKAN 4, it was app to app campaigns only, and so there was no coverage for mobile web to app type of scenario and web enabled inventory. So that was a big leap, I think, with SKAN 4, in addition to those other items. There are some questions that came in with regard to some features for certain media partners, like Meta, for TikTok, for some others, in terms of, are they ready for SKAN 4? What features have they released? Things are moving so fast. I would encourage, if you are working with any of those, to reach out either to your client success manager here if you use Kochava, because there could be some specific granular updates that are either forthcoming in very short term and or further out that we may be aware of. But also check with your account exec at the network if you have a dedicated account rep in terms of where they're at. Some, I think, are still testing SKAN 4 traffic. I know there's been some big ones recently, which is part of the uptick we saw in that one graph, that have switched and started doing predominantly SKAN 4 enabled campaigns. But I think it'd be hard for us to answer that here and maybe potentially steering you in the wrong direction. So thank you for those questions, though. Those are helpful.
Yeah, one quick thing I'll add to that is, even though we don't have the exact details right now, those are the things that you want to be paying attention to as advertisers, especially if you already have an updated SDK in place, because you can look at your data as advertisers roll out support for different features and do a pre-post analysis to see how that impacts your data. And also just being aware of when those changes are occurring. So if you do see an increase in the conversion volume that you're seeing, that you can attribute it back to that change that the publisher made.
Yeah, that's important. And let's jump into, it's been great to kind of unpack current state of SKAN, TLDR. I want to talk about best practices now. And I think this is kind of the meatiest part of our discussion, I think, in terms of actionable takeaways for the audience. So I'd love to have you kick this off, Zach, from Wavemaker's perspective, and then we'll jump to you next, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I guess really the big question is, should I be using SKAN as my source of truth? Why should I be using SKAN as my source of truth? And to answer that question, I want to point out two things that we know to be true about SKAN. The first is that it's deterministic, it's reliable data, it's coming right from the device. So if we're seeing an event being registered within SKAN, we know that that event actually occurred. The second thing is we know that that data is incomplete. There are a percentage of conversions that are unobservable. Even with the changes coming out with SKAN 4, there's still going to be a percentage of conversions that are unobservable. But I want advertisers to get past that mental block, because if you look back through the history of digital marketing, we've never had an attribution solution that captured 100% of traffic. And with SKAN, there are ways to use that as your baseline and actions you can take to make that picture more complete, to calibrate that data so you can give, so you can have a more true representation of the value that the media is driving for your business. So I have a couple of examples of that here. One way, if you want to just take SKAN at face value, making sure that you're updated to the latest SDK. We mentioned knowing which features publishers are going to support and when, so you can keep track of that. Implementing a conversion mapping and source ID strategy, which I know Mark and Brooke are going to talk about, another way to minimize the volume of unobservable events as much as possible. And then the last one is to balance your optimization KPI with your business KPI, which is to say, we all want to plan and optimize towards an event that's as closely tied to revenue or business value as possible. But sometimes what we've seen with some of the advertisers that we work with at Wavemaker is the further you go down the funnel, from install to in-app event 1 to a longer latent in-app event, the percentage of unobservable conversions with SKAN gets larger and larger. And I would encourage advertisers to do that type of analysis on their own data and make a decision as to whether or not you want to use a KPI that is more closely tied to revenue, but perhaps more impacted by the limitations of SKAN, or something like an install or an early event that may be less impacted. And when you think about it, it makes sense that further events down the funnel are going to be impacted by, certainly with SKAN, the single look back window, with things like privacy thresholds. So being aware of all of that and finding that right balance within your KPI is an important step. Another thing that you can do to sort of close that gap within the SKAN data is calibrating that data using an estimation of the percentage of conversions that are unobservable. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. A really simple example would be to, if you have IDFA, ATT opt-in data, looking at something like the install to first event conversion rate and applying that to your SKAN data. You can get very granular, you can get very scientific about how you implement a strategy like that. The one watch out I would say is you don't want to run the risk of overvaluing your media or applying multipliers that would do that, because that can be just as detrimental, if not more, than undervaluing your media. And then the last recommendation with SKAN is, and this is really the gold standard, is to calibrate your data using the results of incrementality tests. So if I can say, here's what I'm seeing through my attribution model, I know that this is the relationship between that data set and the unattributed revenue for my business, then I can apply a calibration, a multiplier, to really assign a true value to that action and optimize in real time off of the attribution data, knowing that it's giving me a truer idea of how much value that particular media tactic is driving for my business.
Yeah, those are good insights. And one of the things you mentioned on source ID strategy, I think if folks aren't aware, in SKAN 1, 2, and 3, it was campaign ID. It was a 2-digit field. Right now, that was migrated to source identifier with V4, and it became a 4-digit value. And so I know that's something specifically, Mark, from a Dataseat perspective, in terms of how that's approached. Apple didn't say, in stone, here's how you need to map to this 4-digit source identifier. It gave an idea, if you will, guidance, but it is somewhat left up to the publisher or the DSP or the ad network. So can you unpack Dataseat's approach to that and why it's important?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of information here to pack in for sure. But I think first and foremost, you nailed it. If you only were familiar with previous versions of SKAN, you wouldn't even know what source identifier is, right? It was previously referred to as campaign ID. Source identifier is not to be confused with source app ID, which is the publisher app. Source identifier is 4 digits, or better thought of as 3 parts, right? So you have upper digit 1, upper digit 2, and then the lower digits over there on the right. So the best way to think of this is, this is your DSP, your network's best friend, right? This is what we use to optimize the campaign, right? These can be basically set up so that we're receiving back contextual signals in order to optimize, right? But there's obviously strategy in here. So let's talk about each one of these real quickly. So the 39 here in the lower digits represents one of 100 variables, 00 through 99. Upper digit 2, the 7, represents 10 variables, 0 through 9. And then upper digit 1 represents, again, another 10 variables, 0 through 9. So again, you can set these to any, campaign signals or whatever you want to receive back in order to optimize the campaign. However, these are held to our, privacy thresholds, or what we know now as SKAN 4 is tiers of crowd anonymity, right? So you want to be very strategic with this. So over on the right, the lower digits, you're guaranteed to get those back, right? So those are a little bit more of a must know. So SKAN is very customizable. It's very specific to the individual advertiser, budgets, KPIs, targeting, whatever that might be. So these digits could be set up to publisher app. It could be creative, whatever that might be. As you head up to the left, these are held to more of a higher tier of crowd anonymity. So you're not always going to get these back, right? So the 7 here represents upper digit 2. Again, 10 variables you could set to line item, exchange, geo, device model. And then moving further to the left, upper digit 1 held to the highest tier of crowd anonymity. You can, again, set that to any campaign signals you want. The idea here, though, is that right to left, it goes must know to more of a nice to know, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah. And we have some pretty helpful grids, if you will. And I think there's actually one of the resources linked in the docs tab from Dataseat that's a reference for this particular concept. And so that's a piece of content you can access through the docs tab and download after the fact. And then within Kochava's ultimate guide to SKAN for marketers, we unpack this in a lot of detail as well. So if all of the crowd anonymity and the source identifier, as well as the source app ID and conversion value availability based on crowd anonymity within the different windows, postback window 1, 2, and 3 is something that interests you. It's quite a matrix. Feel free to grab that and you can read that to your heart's content. Jumping next, there's some kind of best practices overarching from a Kochava POV and a measurement perspective. So Brooke, looking to you for some of your insights here on the front lines in support of advertisers. We're going to talk about understanding the matrix of iOS signals, because SKAN isn't the only signal that you have available. We can talk about a little bit more about conversion value models real quick. And then do you want to hit on this notion of crowd anonymity? You need volume to reach those higher thresholds. And so if you have a ton of budget to spend and you have a sizable budget with every partner, it's not so much an issue. But if you have a finite spend, that's a bit more limiting. You want to be careful how thin you spread that, because it will impact your ability, I think, to reach those thresholds. And then we'll explore MMM too as a concept for future-proofing measurement. So Brooke, do you want to quickly unpack for us the kind of current state of the signals available on iOS?
Yeah, absolutely. I think iOS is an interesting area right now. We have deterministic attribution that measurement partners like Kochava can do with consented data. So that's going to be a situation where your app is prompting for ATT. We're able to collect the IDFA. And then on the network side, the app that the ad is placed in is also prompting for ATT, and the user's opted in both places. That's the ideal state. That type of attribution will look very much like what we see on Android, what we have been able to see on iOS in the past. It's full deterministic attribution at the row level or at the device level. Obviously, with the implementation of ATT, not everyone is opting in, and we see pretty low consent percentages across most apps. So that's where Apple presents us with SKAN, or SKAdNetwork. And that's what we've been talking about today. It gives you, for those opt-out users or just across the board on your iOS campaigns, it gives you deterministic reporting or deterministic attribution with aggregate reporting, anonymized reporting, and it's also delayed. However, it's still good data, and for an advertiser who is maybe not prompting for ATT, this is pretty much what you have. And so it's what we're learning to optimize so that you can get the most out of SKAN. As far as getting the most out of SKAN, it's going to come down to, what KPIs you're focused on. Are they happening close to the install? Can we maybe adjust the amount of time that the SDK is pinging SKAN to retrieve post-install event data? Is it install focused? That's going to help the turnaround time a bit more on the SKAN postbacks. There's a lot that we can do. And I guess the big takeaway there would be talk to your client success manager if you're a Kochava. If you're using Kochava as your MMP, I'm sure other MMPs have something similar. But we have things that we can do, analyses that we can run to assist in optimizing your conversion model for your app. And then lastly, Apple Search Ads, of course. Everyone is spending on Apple Search Ads. It runs outside of SKAN, and also provides you with device and key level real-time attribution, which is very helpful.
Yeah. And you mentioned the conversion value as a key tenet of the SKAN, if you will, adoption. And so I think I went back by mistake here in the slides. There we go. So this is actually a pie chart that's showing Kochava and the various conversion value models that we have available, and the adoption across 100% of the iOS apps measuring with Kochava, which model approach they've chosen. Do you want to unpack this for us a little bit, Brooke? I know that you have quite familiarity with the different models, and any thoughts on why we're seeing the popularity of the highest value event model compared to some of the others?
Sure. As far as why highest value is so popular, I don't know if I have any real insight. I do have a lot of clients who are using it. I do think that the highest value event is pretty easy to map over to the new coarse and fine models that we're seeing in SKAN 4. So maybe that's a part of it. But you can see we have 4 default pre-built out conversion models that I would say are useful for most of our clients. I guess we can see in this chart, custom is only 10%. But we have highest value event, which is sort of, if you think about the events in your app as a one directional flow that users are going to achieve one at a time, and they're not going to be necessarily repeating actions that happened in the past. This model captures how far into your funnel the user gets. With SKAN 3, there's some optimization there around are all these events happening within 24 to 48 hours of the install? That's ideal to allow you to get some turnaround time back. If not, you can extend the SKAN 3 window, but it's also going to delay when you get your reporting back, which is sort of that cost-benefit analysis of getting data back quickly enough that it's useful, but keeping the window open long enough that you get the events that you're interested in the KPIs. User journey is more of a choose your own adventure. It tracks events as the user goes through. Revenue is pretty self-explanatory, and engagement is more focused on what the user is doing, or that the user is active in the app. Custom, I will just throw out there. We have an amazing team here at Kochava called the Kochava Foundry team. I think of them as sort of an extension of my client's data science branch or data science arm of their organization. And they are all about custom analyses, and we have some incredibly smart people who know way more about SKAN than I do. And they will run through all of the data available from your app to create a custom conversion model for each client that is optimizing the bits that we have available to make sure we're making the most of them and actually getting results back. With SKAN 4, and I think Mark talks about this a bit later, but there is sort of as you're adjusting from SKAN 3 to SKAN 4, how do we adjust your model too to make sure that things are fitting into the coarse and fine buckets in a way that actually makes sense and has value? So there is some conversation to be had there as well. And then as we can see, 1/4 of our advertisers are tracking installs only. That's an interesting approach. And I mean, maybe it could be users who are genuinely focused on install or just haven't selected a model and haven't gotten set up with the conversion model side of SKAN.
Yeah, and one quick comment on that, and I like this slide a lot, and I know that we get into it a little bit in a slide or two, but there's real strategy in setting up conversion events, right? Both fine grain and coarse grain. How many do you use? You have up to 64 variables that you can use for the fine grain events. You're bucketing those into a low, medium, or high. And we've seen some advertisers on our side that have said, look, if we're going to use 30 of them, right, we're going to bucket the first 10 as low, the second, however many is medium, and then we're only going to save 2 and tag those as high. So at least when those come through in the second and the third post back, and we're only getting that coarse grain conversion value, we know almost exactly what those conversions are, or at the very least, we can pinpoint them to one of 2 or one of 3. So I think there's a ton of strategy in setting up conversion models in coarse grain and in fine grain. And so it was actually a great introduction that we got from SKAN 4.
Yeah. And I think, the events you measure with your MMP, those are what in our dashboard, as an example, would be configured into your model. So if you're not measuring any events, you have no option to incorporate those into your model. But definitely the post-install insights, right? It's kind of like the notion of it's great to have an install, but it's better to have an install that goes on to make a purchase or, goes on to subscribe or start a free trial, as opposed to an install that is installed and then no engagement after the day of install. And that insight is only going to be something that's available if you are measuring post-install events that you can factor into those models. If you want to, if you are struggling with your conversion value model, or you want to connect with the Foundry team and find out more about this notion of the SKAD consult is what we typically call it, but it's a complete review of your iOS app and the first-party data within it to inform you of the best optimal approach based on your KPIs to how you should configure SKAN. There's a link to a resource within the Docs tab, so be sure to check that out if you have time. And touching base real fast on that notion of the mapping of the coarse to the fine-grained, the revenue model is my favorite just because it's so easy to understand in terms of typically the revenue model pre-SKAN 4, right? There was this notion of, okay, well, the lower conversion value, you could map essentially buckets of revenue. And if a purchase happened in your app post-install, you would have these ranges of revenue where you would know a purchase happened and you'd have a revenue range that purchase fell within. If multiple purchases happened, that revenue range would go up. And so when you got the post back, if you got conversion value 23 versus 61, it told you what revenue range that user cohort fell within in terms of in-app purchase behavior. With coarse, you can see very logically we have low map to the lower ranges, medium to the medium ranges, and high to the high ranges. So that's probably the easiest visual I've found we've been able to build and share. It's a little less intuitive sometimes with some of the other models, but you're right, Brooke, that the highest event completed is another model that really fits nicely into that. So if you are curious about conversion models, that could be an entire webinar on its own, I think, just because there's so much intricacy to that. Again, check out the resources in the Docs tab. We explore that in far more detail in our guide as well, or reach out to your client success manager, and we'd love to chat more about that. I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but this is just the notion of the conversion value and what's available based on crowd anonymity tier, and then the conversion window, whether it's the first, the second, or the third. I know you had already commented to some of this, Zach, Mark, and Brooke. Is there anything else with this visual up on screen that you want to point out or speak to related to this notion for conversion values?
I just think it furthers the value of the coarse grain that we were given. It's come up a lot in, webinars or presentations that I've done where it's like, we already had the fine grain. Why do we care about the coarse grain, right? It's less granular. What does it really do for us? Well, the benefit is that we have these now 2 additional postbacks. We can now track conversions up through day 35. And most importantly, as this shows here, these are held to a lower tier of crowd anonymity versus the fine grain. So, in that first postback, you can either get a null, you can get a coarse grain or a fine grain, right? But in those next 2, postbacks, you're either getting a null or a coarse grain. So I think that's an important thing as well, is that, you can get smart about this. You can bucket these in a way where you can sort of narrow it down. But also it's held to that, that lower tier of crowd anonymity, which is key.
Yeah, and that ties right back into what we've been talking about with the source ID strategy and making sure that you're not fragmenting your media too much, selecting KPIs that are too low in volume, because you don't want to fall into tier 0 where you're not getting a post back at all, or you're getting a null post back.
Yeah, no, really insightful. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to jump into just a quick hit on the notion of really incremental measurement, MMM as a future-proof solution. Brooke, do you want to give a quick voiceover on this? And then I've got some questions I want to peel off from the Q&A tab here.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that everybody in this space is probably pretty familiar with, or at least interested in, incrementality or mixed MMM modeling. It's something that's future-proof. It moves us away from device IDs. Here at Kochava, AIM, or always-on incrementality measurement tool, is the direction that we're heading. It's very exciting. I have a lot of clients who are interested in it and starting to have early conversations. The key here is that these kind of models can take in the event data that we're getting from your app, and then cost data, and then do the modeling off of that historical data instead of relying on IDFAs and ADIDs as we sort of head into the future with Apple and Google making the direction that we seem to be heading is away from device IDs. Super quick. But if you're interested in learning more, I'd be happy to talk more about it. Anyone at Kochava would. We have a lot of great resources as well, so please reach out.
Yeah, and there's a link in the docs tab to that site if you are curious to explore it further. So let's jump into some final Q&A, and I might try and bring our last poll online here too. So I'm gonna actually stop sharing screen so that we can see all of us a little bit bigger now. So one of the questions that came in that I would love to have you comment on is from Cesar. If we use Kochava, do we have to update our SDK for SKAN4, or does Kochava do it automatically?
Well, I can take that one just real quick. Yeah. So it depends on what SDK version you're on. I believe 7.0 and above will support SKAN4, but if you are below 7, you will need to update the SDK, and that is something that your app dev team will handle.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have questions too, we do have a checklist blog that is a checklist for migration from SKAN3 to SKAN4. So if you haven't made that leap yet and you are curious as to the steps to get there, reach out and your CSM can provide it, or you can go to our blog on the Kochava site and search for that. It should come up fairly quickly for you. This next question for Dataseat, Mark. So without placement visibility possible on coarse conversion value postbacks, broadly, how do the coarse conversion values inform optimization? This could be generally, or even for Dataseat specifically.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. We don't want to confuse source identifier, which I was speaking to source app ID, right? So the source app ID is always the same field, right? In terms of what you're getting back, which is the publisher app, right? You do not get those on the second and third post back. So it's a really great question. However, you can still get back the source identifier. So if you utilize publisher app or publisher mobile website with SKAN4 within those lower digits or any of those digits that you're receiving back, then you can do placement optimization. So, it's customizable. You got to be really smart about it. But if you know what you're doing, as Dataseat does, it makes sense. So again, source app ID, source identifier, 2 different things. source app ID is the app, the publisher app, but you can configure those in the source identifier and get those back on the second and third post back.
That's great. That's great insight. Thank you. And I think that makes sense. Yeah, because the source app ID, we have a grid similar to the one we showed just a little bit ago for the conversion value. And source app ID is really hard to get. I think you get it in the first window if you hit the higher crowd anonymity, which you're going to have some significant spend and conversion volume to get there. I wanted to resurface the poll from earlier. I also launched our second poll here just a moment ago, so feel free to jump into that. But we had some additional voting that came in on the poll that we launched first. So interesting that it ended up being that 26% of folks are not using SKAN at all yet. So if you fall into that bucket and you are thinking to yourself, I'm not using it at all, but I need to start, get in touch with us, get in touch with Dataseat, Zach at Wavemaker. Like we can help. It is something that you can accomplish, and you can extract meaningful data out of SKAN to optimize on. I know it's been a struggle for some, but it is possible with the right help. So let me check now on our other poll. I'm going to stop sharing this one and see if we have some traction on this yet. Let me go ahead and open it on screen. So this second poll was, have you run SKAN only campaigns with any ad networks and DSPs? So interesting, 41.67% split between no and yes. And we're getting some updated data in here now. But can you speak to this, Mark? Just obviously as a DSP that supports SKAN only campaigns, your hopes for kind of 2024 as a partner that has good SKAN ready inventory.
Yeah, sure. And we support all campaigns. We also run Android, and so we're very mobile holistic, just as a preface. But this makes sense. These numbers certainly make sense, right? There's still companies that are running using other attribution and whatnot. But as far as SKAN only, I would say that it's probably about, I don't know, for us maybe 60-70%, because again, this is who we are, and we're this privacy first, contextual focused mobile DSP. But these numbers make sense, right? And I think that as this year progresses, we're going to see more and more. Again, we've seen increases. We've seen everyone moving more towards SKAN, right? Whether it's your first iteration of SKAN or you're moving from 3 to 4 or whatever that might be. So we're seeing these numbers increase over time, and I truly feel like by spring of 2024, it will be very much closer to double this at least.
Yeah. I think we're already seeing the trend line go up, and I'll be curious when we pass that Rubicon, if you will, where SKAN 4 overtakes SKAN 3, similar to what happened with SKAN 2 and 3. So, well, in the closing moments here, any final thoughts? I obviously thank you from Kochava and on behalf of myself for participating in today's webinar. The insights were great, and I want to just give you each a final moment to share any final thoughts as we close out the hour here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. These are definitely complex topics. There's a lot to unpack. Even some of the topics that we touched upon deserve their own discussion around, like incrementality. So we're here to help our clients and help advertisers understand some of those complexities and make sure that your media strategy is really taking those into account, because that's how we drive success and look to the future. Yeah.
Yeah, my final thoughts are it's coming. Embrace it and talk to your partners. Talk to Kochava, talk to Wavemaker, talk to Dataseat. The companies out there that are focused on this and put privacy first along with performance.
Yeah, I feel like I'm echoing everyone else. Talk to us for sure. On the Kochava side, we're always happy to help. I feel like, especially if you're an SDK client, we help take a lot of the lift out of running with SKAN. And as any questions come up, the client success team here is always happy to jump on calls, emails, and get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you very much. And all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope wherever you're at, you can stay warm.